My name is Audrey Harper. I'm 27, a senior software engineer, and 1 year ago I woke up in a hospital bed with steel rods in both legs. Alone. No flowers. No family at my side. Just a voicemail from my mother chirping, "We're boarding for Rome, don't call us, roaming's expensive." While I was fighting for my life after a brutal car crash, my parents and brother used my credit card to take a luxury vacation across Italy. But that betrayal? It was just the tip of the iceberg. This isn't a story about an accident. It's about what happens when love becomes currency and loyalty is weaponized against you. It's about a daughter pushed to the edge, and what she did when she decided not to fall but to rise. Where are you watching this from? Drop a comment below. I want to know who's listening. Because this is the story of how I broke free. The last thing I remembered was the screech of tires, the sound of glass shattering, and the unmistakable weightless moment before impact. I had just wrapped up a late night at the office, running on caffeine and adrenaline after delivering a major software update. I was tired but proud. I never saw the other car coming. It blew through a red light at over 50 miles per hour, slamming directly into the driver's side of my compact sedan. Then, nothing. When I opened my eyes again, everything was too bright. The ceiling above me was white, blurry. My mouth felt dry, my legs numb, my chest heavy. I couldn't move. Machines beeped rhythmically beside me, a soft hiss of oxygen flowing through a nasal tube. A dull, deep ache radiated from every bone. I blinked, disoriented, trying to piece together where I was. A nurse appeared, kind-eyed and calm, her name badge reading Riley. "You're in the ICU, Audrey," she said gently. "You've been in a car accident. You're safe now. Just breathe, okay?" Safe? My body didn't feel safe. My legs were in metal braces. I could barely lift my arm. But I nodded because I didn't have the energy to speak. My mind caught up slowly, crawling through fog. I had a family. They must have been called. Of course they had. My parents, my brother. They'd be here. I asked Riley if they were in the waiting room. He paused just long enough for me to sense something was wrong. "They were notified right after your admission," she said. "They visited briefly, while you were unconscious. And now," I whispered. "They're not here," she said softly. Hours passed. My head pounded with confusion, pain, and a sickening weight of dread. I asked to call them. My fingers shook as I tapped my mom's number. Voicemail. I tried again. Straight to voicemail. Then my phone buzzed. One new voicemail. My heart skipped. Relief. Maybe they were just delayed. Maybe they were coordinating care or dealing with the shock. I pressed play. My mother's voice came through the speaker, cheerful and lilting. "Hi, honey. Just wanted to let you know we're at the airport. Finally boarding our flight to Rome. We've been planning this for months, and now that Eric's between jobs again, we decided to bring him along too. The doctor said you'd be in the hospital for a while anyway, so there's really no point in us sitting around in Chicago when we could be seeing the Colosseum, right?" I froze. In the background, I heard my father's voice. "Tell her not to call us while we're there. International roaming is expensive." "Oh yes," my mom continued, laughing. "Gerald says don't bother calling us in Rome. Roaming charges are ridiculous and we'll be too busy sightseeing anyway. We'll be back in 3 weeks. The hospital has our email if there's an emergency. Ethan says thanks for the spending money. Ciao Bella." The message ended with the unmistakable sound of my brother's smug laughter. My phone slipped from my hand and hit the side rail of the bed with a dull thud. I stared at the ceiling, the words echoing in my head like gunshots. I wasn't just abandoned, I was dismissed. Written off as an inconvenience. They hadn't even tried to pretend. They'd taken my money, booked their dream vacation, and left me broken and drugged in a hospital bed. Pain tore through me worse than the broken bones. My chest ached, not from injuries, but from the unraveling of everything I thought I knew. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Not yet. The shock was too thick, like glue holding back grief. When Dr. Monica Lewis came in for rounds, she found me silent and staring. She checked my vitals, adjusted my IV, then sat beside me. "Your nurse said you heard from your family," she said gently. I nodded. "They've gone to Italy," I croaked. Dr. Lewis blinked, stunned. "Italy. They took my brother," I said. "They used my credit card." She didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. Then her voice dropped low. "I've been a trauma surgeon for 15 years. I've seen families fall apart under pressure. But this. I'm so sorry, Audrey. Her sympathy broke the dam. I sobbed until I couldn't breathe. Riley rushed in, pressing a button on the morphine pump. I resisted it at first, wanting the pain to prove something. But eventually the drug washed over me, numbing the physical agony, leaving behind a different kind of hollowness. As I drifted in and out of sleep, one question burned beneath it all. If this was what love looked like, what exactly had I been giving my life to? But the most painful answers were yet to come, waiting quietly in the shadows of memory, preparing to strike when I least expected them. I didn't sleep much that night. Even with the medication dulling my pain, my mind kept spinning. The voicemail replayed itself in my head, line by casual line, each word twisting deeper. By morning I wasn't just heartbroken, I was hollow. The kind of emptiness that only comes when a truth finally surfaces after years of denial. Riley came in early with fresh linens and a gentle smile, but I couldn't return it. She noticed immediately. "Rough night?" she asked, placing a cup of ice chips near my bed. I nodded. "Worse than the pain?" she asked again. I hesitated, then said quietly, "The worst pain isn't in my legs." That was the first time I admitted it out loud. And once I did, the memories began to surface, not as flashes but as slow, steady echoes. I started thinking about all the moments I had buried under the label of family loyalty. My 16th birthday, when my parents promised a special dinner and then canceled last minute because Eric had a last-minute basketball scrimmage. I had spent that night alone in our kitchen, a grocery store cake sitting untouched beside me. No balloons. No candles. Just silence. Then there was the college graduation. I remember staring out into the crowd, searching for their faces, only to receive a text 5 minutes before the ceremony. "Eric made the regional finals. We'll make it up to you. You know we're proud." I had smiled through it, telling myself it was fine, that I didn't need the applause. But now, lying in this hospital bed, those moments didn't feel like sacrifices. They felt like evidence. When Samantha, my hospital roommate, returned from her scan that morning, she immediately noticed something had shifted. "Someone kick your soul while I was gone?" she asked in her usual blunt tone. I laughed, just a little, the sound bitter. "Something like that," I replied. She didn't press. Instead, she sat beside her bed and said, "I've learned something about families. Sometimes the people who share your blood know exactly how to make you bleed." Riley came in again mid-morning, this time holding a printout and looking tense. She sat down beside me and hesitated. "I'm not supposed to show you this without clearance," she said, "but I think you need to see it." On the page was a flagged transaction from my medical file. A charge of $5,000 had been billed to my personal card 2 days earlier. "Your mother authorized a transfer to a travel concierge service from your account," she said softly. "She said you'd approved it." My heart didn't race. My pace slowed, as if it had known all along and was finally done pretending otherwise. "For shopping," I said. Riley didn't reply. He didn't have to. That afternoon, Dr. Lewis came in to check on me. I barely heard her run through the list of surgeries and medications. At some point, she stopped talking and sat down again beside me. "You need to start healing beyond the physical," she said gently. "I can't prescribe anything for that, Audrey. But I want you to know something. You don't deserve what's happening to you." I didn't respond. Not because I disagreed, but because I didn't yet know how to believe it. Later that evening, I tried calling again. My mother. Straight to voicemail. My father. No answer. Eric. Finally, after 3 attempts, he replied via text. "Can't talk. Gondola ride in Venice. Nurses will take care of you. That's their job." The screen blurred. My fingers trembled, not from pain this time but from something colder, recognition. I was on my own. Entirely. At 3 a.m. I gave up trying to sleep and opened my phone again. I scrolled through my mother's social media posts. I hadn't looked in weeks. There they were, my family smiling beneath Roman skies. My dad with a gelato. Eric in a leather jacket beside a Vespa. My mother standing in front of a boutique in new sunglasses. No mention of me. No updates. Just hashtags like "living la dolce vita." Then I saw it. A post, dated 3 weeks before the accident. A photo of their airline tickets, captioned, "Counting down to our Roman holiday, 21 days to go." My accident had happened just 4 days before their flight. They hadn't left because they couldn't cancel. They had chosen to leave knowing I was hospitalized. That's when it broke. Everything I'd tried to keep intact. The love I thought was unconditional. The belief that I mattered to them beyond what I could give. The illusion that I was part of their lives by choice, not convenience. But the unraveling wasn't over. Because now that the truth had shattered everything I once trusted, the only thing left was to confront just how deeply I'd been used. And if I had any chance of reclaiming my life, I would have to start by facing the truth I'd ignored for far too long. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the half-closed blinds, casting narrow bands of warmth across the pale walls of my hospital room. But I didn't feel its heat. I stared at the ceiling, my body numb not from medication, but from something colder, disbelief layered with humiliation. There was no more pretending. No more rationalizing their choices. My family hadn't just walked away during the worst moment of my life. They had laughed on their way out, using my money to fund it. Riley entered quietly, carrying a tray with breakfast I hadn't asked for. She didn't speak at first, just placed it on the bedside table. I checked in with billing, she said after a beat. There have been more charges. I didn't even flinch. How many? I asked. She took a deep breath. 10 different transactions, all tied to your personal credit card. Luxury shopping, high-end restaurants, spa services in Florence. She paused. And one recurring monthly payment. OnlyFans. I turned my head slowly, incredulity draining into disgust. That has to be Eric, I muttered. Riley didn't deny it. I also saw a charge to a private yacht rental service. Looks like they spent a day sailing off the Amalfi Coast. My stomach twisted. I had imagined them walking museums or sipping wine. Not that it excused any of it, but this wasn't a spontaneous celebration. This was indulgence. At my expense. While I lay broken in a hospital bed, they were treating themselves like royalty with the money I had earned. Riley handed me my laptop. Do you feel strong enough to look? I didn't want to. But I needed to. With shaky fingers I opened my banking dashboard. Passwords, once set up to make life easier for them, now granted me a front-row seat to my own exploitation. There was. Nearly every account drained below what I considered a safe threshold. Recurring payments I hadn't authorized. A mortgage I was still paying. Car leases under my name. Streaming services. Membership dues. But what caught my eye was something buried in a shared family cloud folder, labeled Florida Move Planning. I clicked it open. Inside was a neatly organized spreadsheet, created 3 weeks before my accident. Color-coded. Monthly living expenses for a planned relocation to a retirement community in Florida. Notes about housing tours they had scheduled, estimated move-in dates, and a line item labeled Monthly Audrey Contribution $7,500. A budget. Built on the assumption I would continue funding their lives indefinitely. They were planning their escape into luxury, while I remained shackled to work, to stress, to obligation. They had a vision for their future, and I was the financial foundation of it. I leaned back against the bed, eyes closed. Each breath grew heavier. This wasn't neglect. It was design. They had built a lifestyle dependent on me. Not temporarily. Not out of hardship. But because it was easier. That afternoon, Riley brought someone new into my room. A woman in her early 40s, sharply dressed but warm-eyed. This is Jessica Martinez, Riley said. She's a hospital social worker. I thought maybe you could talk. Jessica sat down beside me and listened quietly as I recounted everything, from the voicemail to the charges to the spreadsheet. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said something I hadn't let myself consider. What you're describing, she said carefully, is a pattern of emotional abuse and financial exploitation. The fact that it's coming from your family doesn't make it less serious. It makes it harder to recognize and even harder to escape. That word, abuse, stuck in my throat. I wanted to deny it. To insist that my parents just didn't realize how much they were asking. That Eric was just struggling. But deep down I knew better. I'd been the one keeping it all afloat while they lived freely, luxuriously, and without accountability. Jessica continued, it's not just about money. It's about control. And the guilt they've placed on you, that's manipulation. The room felt colder then. The kind of cold that comes when someone switches on the lights in a room you thought was yours and shows you all the cracks you never wanted to see. Jessica gave me a list of resources. Therapists. Financial advisors. Support groups for adults dealing with familial financial abuse. You have a right to set boundaries, she said. Even with the people who raised you. I nodded slowly, because something in me had shifted. I wasn't ready for revenge. Not yet. But I was no longer willing to live like this. Because if they had drawn a blueprint of a life built on my back, then it was time to burn the foundation. And I was just getting started. The next morning I woke before the nurses made their first rounds. For once it wasn't pain that stirred me, it was clarity. There was a quiet finality to it, like something had been cracked open inside me and now I could finally breathe. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, thinking about every automatic payment, every guilt-ridden phone call, every moment I had swallowed my instincts to keep peace. No more. When Riley arrived with coffee and her usual clipboard of vitals, I looked at her with a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. "I'm ready," I said. She didn't ask for what. She just pulled up a chair beside me and said, "Let's start with the bank." Following Marcus Green's instructions, the financial advisor Jessica had referred me to, we began the process. I opened each account one by one. My parents were listed as authorized users on nearly all of them. It had seemed harmless years ago, back when I thought I was just making their lives easier. But now it felt like handing a thief your house keys and hoping they only take what they need. I revoked their access, changed passwords, set up two-factor authentication. Every click was a small release, like I was unlocking myself from invisible chains. Riley watched silently, offering quiet support. When we got to the automatic transfers, mortgage, car payments, expense allowances, I canceled each one. My hands shook, not from fear but from the adrenaline of finally drawing a line. Then we moved on to credit cards. I called each company, explained the situation and requested new cards with new numbers. When I got to the card used for their Italian vacation, I hesitated. Then I reported the charges as fraudulent. The representative on the line informed me a fraud investigation would be opened, and the cardholders would be contacted. I nodded. That might be the moment they realize something's changed, I said. Riley smirked. Let them find out the hard way. The most satisfying moment came next. I remembered that my father had used my email to confirm their return flight from Rome. I pulled up the reservation, logged in and stared at the itinerary for a long beat. I could see their names, Gerald, Diane and Eric Harper, booked on a business class flight back to Chicago 3 days from now. With one click I canceled the return. The system issued a partial credit back to my account. Riley raised an eyebrow. You just stranded them in Italy. Only temporarily, I said. They have their own cards. They can pay their own way home. For once. After that we moved through the rest of the list. The cars. I contacted the leasing company and informed them I would no longer be making payments on vehicles I didn't possess. Eric's sports car was parked in airport long-term parking. I arranged for it to be towed. The mortgage was harder. I wasn't on the deed, so I couldn't take any legal action regarding the property. But I stopped the payments I'd been making. I also called every utility provider and removed my credit cards as payment methods. One by one, I disconnected myself from their financial lifelines. Cell phone plans, streaming services, golf club dues, even subscriptions to wine clubs I had never heard of. By the time we paused for lunch, it felt like I had physically shed weight. Riley brought takeout and sat cross-legged in the visitor's chair while I leaned back against the pillows. What about stuff at their house? She asked. Anything you want back? I thought for a moment. My grandmother's jewelry came to mind. She had left it to me in her will, but my mother had claimed it for safekeeping. There were also personal documents, keepsakes, even an old laptop filled with code and writing I hadn't backed up. Things that belonged to me, things I would not leave behind. There is, I said. But I can't exactly get there on my own. Riley's eyes lit up. I'm off tomorrow, she said. And my brother Danny has a truck. The next morning, with permission from the hospital, a wheelchair and 2 determined accomplices, I returned to the house I had once called home. And this time I wasn't coming back as a daughter. I was coming back as someone reclaiming what was hers. Because they hadn't just taken my money. They had taken my place. My dignity. My trust. And now it was time to take it all back. The house looked exactly as I remembered it. White shutters, freshly cut lawn, the small wooden swing still hanging from the maple tree out front. For a moment I hesitated, sitting in the wheelchair in the back of Danny's truck, watching the wind ripple through the curtains of my old bedroom window. But that hesitation didn't last. Riley hopped out first, holding a printed list in her hand. "We go in, we get only your things, and we leave. Fast, clean, legal," she said. I nodded. "Let's do it." The key still worked. So did the security code. They hadn't bothered to change a thing. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and bleach, like someone had tried too hard to make the place feel lived in, warm, safe. It didn't feel like that to me. Not anymore. We started in the upstairs hallway. My childhood bedroom hadn't changed much. Posters still lined the walls. My bookshelf, though dustier now, still held awards from science fairs and programming competitions that no one had ever displayed in the living room. We moved efficiently. I pointed. Riley and Danny packed. My birth certificate, social security card, college diplomas, bank statements, my old journals, a silver USB drive labeled Capstone Project. Then the keepsakes, framed photos of me with friends, some of which I remembered being told to put away because they made the living room look cluttered. An old sweatshirt I used to wear during finals week. A small stuffed bear I had received from a hospital volunteer when I broke my arm in middle school. Next was my grandmother's jewelry. My mother had always claimed those pieces were too valuable to leave with me. "You'll lose them," she said. "They're safer here." But I knew better. I wheeled into her bedroom where Riley opened the jewelry box sitting on the dresser. There, nestled in velvet, was the pearl necklace my grandmother wore at her wedding, a necklace specifically bequeathed to me in her will. I stared at it for a long moment. Riley lifted it carefully. "You okay?" she asked. "She wore this to that charity gala last year," I said softly. Posted pictures all over Facebook with a caption about family heirlooms passed down with love. Riley didn't speak. He didn't have to. The look on her face was enough. We moved on to my father's office. Danny, sorting through drawers, whistled low and handed me a folder. Inside were loan documents, overdue credit notices, and even a second mortgage agreement I had never seen before. My father had leveraged the house against his retirement without telling anyone, not even my mother, from the looks of it. It explained everything. Why their financial hardships had started so suddenly. Why they needed more and more each month. Their life hadn't fallen apart. It had collapsed under the weight of their own decisions. I had just been the scaffolding holding it up. But the most unexpected discovery came in Eric's room. Riley rifled through his desk while I stayed near the door. She held up a sleek brochure. "Retirement homes," she said, flipping it over. "Palm Ridge, Gulf Coast Villas, Ocean View Estates." Clipped to the back was a handwritten note. "Monthly support needed from Audrey. $7,500 includes car, rent, insurance." I stared at the paper. They were planning to ask me to fund an early retirement. For all three of them. It wasn't a question. Just a truth sliding into place. "They weren't planning to tell you," Riley added. "They were going to hand you the bill and call it love." We packed everything carefully. Documents in sealed envelopes. Jewelry wrapped in tissue. Personal items folded and labeled. We didn't take anything that wasn't mine, not even things I'd once paid for. I didn't want revenge. I wanted distance. Outside we loaded the truck. I sat in the back facing the house. The swing creaked lightly in the breeze. I'd spent years thinking this was where I'd always belong. But the truth was I had never truly lived in that house. I had only maintained it, funded it, endured it. Back at the hospital, Riley and Danny helped unpack. Aunt Margaret stopped by later that evening to pick up the valuables for safekeeping. "You did the right thing," she said, her voice shaking just a little. "It's going to be hard when they come back. But you are not alone." He was right. I wasn't. I didn't know exactly what the confrontation would look like when it came, but I did know one thing for sure. This time I'd be standing on my own terms. And I wouldn't be standing alone. It happened sooner than expected. 3 days after the retrieval, 2 days before their scheduled return, I was woken by a rapid series of phone vibrations. My screen lit up with messages, emails, voicemail notifications, social alerts. Riley entered the room minutes later, her expression tight. "They just found out," she said quietly. Apparently, when they attempted to check into a hotel in Florence, their credit cards were declined. All of them. Then their bank access failed. Next came the blocked phone numbers. The only way they could reach me was by email, which I had deliberately left open for documentation. The subject lines came in fast. "What the hell is going on? Fix this now. Are you out of your mind?" One from my mother read, "I'm stuck in Italy with no money because of you. You're being selfish and cruel." As the day progressed, the tone changed. Rage faded into guilt, then into threats. "Your father is contacting a lawyer as soon as we land. You'll regret this. Family doesn't treat each other this way." I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded everything to Benjamin, my lawyer. He reviewed the content, confirming what I already suspected. They had no legal claim to anything. Not one transaction had my documented consent. No power of attorney. No agreements. Just years of unchecked access now removed. Later that afternoon, I sent a single reply, prepared in advance. "I am recovering from life-threatening injuries in the hospital, where I've been for over 6 weeks. During this time, you chose to take a vacation abroad using my credit card without my permission. I have reclaimed control of my finances and will no longer be supporting your lifestyle. Any further threats or harassment will be documented and forwarded to legal counsel. I am open to discussing the future of our relationship with a licensed mediator present." I hit send and felt a calm settle over me. It wasn't joy. It wasn't power. It was peace, the kind you feel when a decision is finally made. 5 days later, the hospital staff notified me. My family was in the lobby demanding to see me. Riley stood beside my bed as I adjusted my pillows. "You don't have to do this today," she reminded me. "Or ever." But I nodded. "I've been preparing for this." We requested security to be on standby. Riley remained at my side, arms folded, eyes alert. The door swung open. My father entered first, flushed, chest heaving, eyes hard. My mother followed, her appearance disheveled, hair flat, expensive makeup smudged. Eric trailed behind, sunglasses still on his head, arms crossed. They all started talking at once. "How dare you? After everything we've done. You embarrassed us." Riley stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "One at a time." They turned to me, waiting for me to crumble. I didn't. My mother's eyes narrowed. "Who is she? Why is she even here?" "She stays," I said. "She's been more of a family to me in 6 weeks than you've been in 27 years. That hit hard. My father's voice rose. "You canceled our flights. You froze our accounts. You left us stranded in a foreign country. You left me in a hospital bed after a near-fatal accident," I said. "You told me not to call you. You used my money while I was unconscious." "We had been planning that trip for months," my mother snapped. "We couldn't just cancel everything because you got into an accident. The doctors said you'd recover." "I almost didn't," I replied. "There were complications. Internal bleeding. I could have died while you were posting pictures outside the Trevi fountain." That stunned them into silence. But only for a moment. Eric stepped forward, scoffing. "This isn't about the accident. This is about money. You've always been tight with it." "Eric," I said, "I've paid for your car, your apartment, your career development that somehow always involved video games and designer sneakers. I've supported all of you, fully, for years." "We're your parents," my father said, as if it settled everything. "Of course you should support us. You're both in your early 60s, I said. "You're healthy, capable. But you built a lifestyle you can't afford, then expected me to maintain it. Forever." My mother tried again. "We made sacrifices for you. This is how you repay us." "No," I said quietly. "This is how I finally stop repaying everything you claim I owe." Riley handed me a folder. I opened it and slid it across the tray table. "These are the conditions under which I'm willing to have a relationship with you. One-time transitional support. No ongoing financial assistance. Family events only with professional mediation and mutual respect." My father flipped through the pages, his face darkening. "This is insulting. We're not strangers." "I know," I said. "That's what makes this necessary." "And if we refuse?" my mother asked. I met her gaze. "Then you lose me. For good." They left, slamming the door, voices echoing down the hall. Eric hesitated in the doorway, uncertain. "You know they might lose the house," he muttered. "Where am I supposed to go?" You could try a job, I said. Most people do by 24. He didn't reply. Just shook his head and followed them. Riley sat back down beside me, her hand brushing mine. You did it. I exhaled for the first time all day. Sad. But also for the first time, free. And as the door clicked shut behind them, I knew I would never let them back in the same way again. The week following that confrontation felt strange, quiet but not empty. Like walking into a house after a storm and realizing you're still standing even if some windows are shattered. The emotional noise of my family's presence was gone. And in its place came something I hadn't felt in years: clarity. Physical therapy sessions became my new battlefield. The pain was still there, sharp and stubborn, but I welcomed it. At least it was mine. Progress was slow. Each time I moved my legs even slightly, it felt like lifting bricks. But I counted every small victory. 3 steps with the walker. Standing without assistance for 15 seconds. Showering alone. The muscles I was rebuilding weren't just in my legs. They were in my spine, in my voice, in the parts of me that had grown weak from years of bending. Riley never missed a session. She sat in the corner with her clipboard and her quiet support, but our connection had shifted. What began as care had turned into something deeper, not romantic in some fairy tale sense, but steady, real. We knew each other now, not from dating apps or small talk, but from pain and truth. She saw me at my lowest and she never looked away. One afternoon after therapy, she wheeled me into the courtyard. The sun was warm for early spring and I tilted my face toward it. Do you ever regret stepping in the way you did? I asked her. She looked at me, calm and firm. Not for a second. That same day Eric showed up. I didn't know he was coming. He walked into the facility's common room looking unsure, hands buried in the pockets of a hoodie that looked less expensive than usual. I still think you were wrong, he said, not sitting down. About Mom and Dad. But what they said about you. In the car after the hospital, it wasn't right. He didn't offer an apology, not exactly. But it was the closest he'd ever come to one. And I accepted it not because it fixed anything but because it cracked something open. Over the following weeks he returned. Not often. But enough. Our conversations began to shift, from old arguments to his uncertainty about the future. I don't know how to do this, he admitted one day. Be an adult. Get a real job. Live without someone bankrolling everything. I could have said, you should have thought of that sooner. But I didn't. Instead, I offered him something better. There's a guy at Tech Fusion who's hiring entry-level IT support, I told him. It's not glamorous. But it's a start. He blinked. You'd recommend me? I'd give you a chance, I said. What you do with it is on you. Eric took the job. And to my surprise he kept it. The first time he showed me a real paycheck he didn't brag. He just smiled sheepishly like someone tasting pride for the first time. It wasn't a miracle turnaround. He still carried the entitlement he was raised with. But the cracks in that armor had started to show. My parents, on the other hand, were slower to change. In the months after the confrontation they sent emails. Some emotional, others manipulative. One was a long letter from my mother about family bonds, and how money should never come between us. Another from my father simply read, "We're drowning. Help us." I didn't reply. I forwarded them to Benjamin and stuck to the plan. No direct contact. No funds. 6 months later they finally agreed to family therapy. It was awkward at first. Stilted. My mother cried a lot. My father was defensive. But under the guidance of Dr. Fiona Marshall, progress crept forward. Sessions were hard. Some ended in silence. Others cracked old wounds open. But truth began to take up space where lies once lived. You've always been the strong one, my mother said once, wiping tears. We just leaned on you too much. I didn't answer. Because understanding didn't mean I had to excuse it. As I healed physically, something inside me began to rewire. I reached out to old friends I'd lost during years of overwork and obligation. I joined a support group for trauma survivors. People who'd survived not just accidents but abandonment. We sat in circles and traded stories. We laughed, cried, held silence for one another when words weren't enough. It helped. More than I expected. My relationship with Riley deepened. Slowly, intentionally. Our first official date wasn't candlelit or dramatic. It was a picnic in the hospital garden. I still used a wheelchair. She brought homemade sandwiches and bad jokes. It was perfect. You know the first thing I noticed about you? She asked as we watched the sun set over the lawn. I shook my head. Even when you were at your weakest, she said, you never lost your dignity. That stayed with me. I returned to work part-time 8 months after the accident. My team at TechFusion had held my position, decorating my desk with cards, snacks, and a small potted plant. My hands trembled on the keyboard that first day. I was back. Not just in the building, but in control of my life. Without the financial drain, my savings began to recover. I started browsing home listings. Small places. Accessible. My name on the mortgage. My choices. No one else's. The past hadn't disappeared. It still woke me some nights. But it no longer owned me. Because while they were busy drowning in the consequences of their choices, I had learned to breathe again. And soon I would open my doors, not to the people who had taken from me, but to the ones who had stood by me when I had nothing left. Exactly 1 year after the accident, I hosted a gathering in my new apartment. It wasn't grand, just a modest ground floor unit with wide doorways, soft lighting, and furniture chosen for both comfort and mobility. There were small signs of the journey I had taken. A single forearm crutch leaning against the kitchen counter, a framed quote on the wall that read, "You don't owe anyone the version of yourself that lets them sleep at night." The people who arrived that afternoon didn't come out of obligation. They came out of choice. Riley was the first through the door, carrying a pie she had baked from scratch and grumbling about how the crust didn't turn out right. Aunt Margaret came next, followed by Samantha from the hospital, who claimed she was only there because her bridge club had the day off. A few colleagues from TechFusion trickled in, laughing and bringing wine and thoughtful gifts. Even Eric showed up, hands full with paper plates and an awkward smile that for once didn't feel forced. My parents arrived last. They stood hesitantly at the threshold, unsure whether they were truly welcome. We had spent the past 6 months in therapy, uncovering decades of hurt, denial, and entitlement. The sessions were hard. My father didn't handle confrontation well. My mother was adept at tears but struggled with accountability. Yet for all their flaws they kept showing up. They didn't apologize perfectly. They didn't transform overnight. But they had stopped asking me for money. That, in itself, was a kind of miracle. I opened the door for them, not with open arms but with a calm nod. "Come in," I said. "You know the rules." They did. And they followed them. The evening moved gently. Conversations meandered between hospital memories and new beginnings. At one point, Riley leaned over and whispered, "It's strange, isn't it? Sitting here knowing everything that led to this." I glanced around. Margaret was sharing a story about her late husband with Samantha. Eric was making small talk with one of my coworkers. My mother was quietly placing napkins near the dessert tray. My father stood near the bookshelf looking at a photo of me as a child. One I had chosen to display not for nostalgia but as a reminder. "It doesn't feel like a reunion," I said. "It feels like a reset." Later that night, after everyone had gone except Riley, we stood by the living room window looking out at the city lights. She slipped her hand into mine. It fit there like it belonged. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked softly. I took a deep breath. I was just thinking how strange it is that the worst thing that ever happened to me ended up saving my life. Riley didn't speak. She waited. "If I hadn't had that accident," I continued, "I might still be working 60-hour weeks, handing over my paycheck to people who only loved me when it was convenient. I might still believe that loyalty meant silence. That love meant sacrifice without limit. That family meant never saying no." I turned toward her. "I didn't just survive a car crash. I survived my family." She smiled. "And now I'm building something better. Fully. With people who see me, not what I can give them." We stood there for a while, wrapped in that quiet truth. The months that followed weren't perfect. There were still difficult conversations with my parents, uncomfortable silences with Eric, moments where my boundaries were tested. But I didn't crumble anymore. I didn't retreat. I spoke up. I walked out when needed. I stood tall, even when I had to do it on one leg. My Saturday group sessions with trauma survivors became something sacred. I listened. I shared. I watched people find language for their pain and the courage to start over. And in doing that, I healed parts of myself I didn't know were still bleeding. Riley and I continued to grow together. Slow, intentional, grounded. There were no grand declarations, just daily choices. To stay. To care. To try. At work, I began mentoring new hires, especially the ones who reminded me of myself 5 years ago. Quiet. Overachieving. Eager to please. I told them the truth. That boundaries aren't barriers. That love doesn't require self-erasure. That success means nothing if it costs you your peace. One evening, after another long day filled with small wins, I sat alone on my balcony, a blanket around my shoulders and a cup of tea in my hand. The sky above was streaked with orange and violet. I watched the sun dip below the skyline and thought, this is what freedom feels like. Not loud. Not explosive. Quiet. Earned. Real. To anyone listening, to anyone who's ever felt trapped by the weight of their own family's expectations, hear this. You don't owe anyone your life just because they gave you theirs. Love without respect is manipulation. Support without choice is control. And family, real family, is who stands beside you when you have nothing left to give. This was not a story of revenge. It was a story of reclamation. And I finally belonged to myself. So that's my story, how a single moment of impact didn't just break my bones, but shattered the illusion I had called family for most of my life. It took losing everything I thought I needed to finally see what I truly deserved. Not just survival but peace. Not just love but respect. And not just family by blood but by choice. I know I'm not the only one who's had to walk away to save themselves. Have you ever had to set boundaries with people you were taught never to say no to? What gave you the strength to finally choose yourself? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. If this resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories about rebuilding, reclaiming, and rising stronger than before. Because sometimes the hardest endings are where real freedom begins.